Do you know what OPI stands for? You'll find out and a lot more in the following report, which will be given by Brother Paul Gillies, who serves as the overseer of OPI.
Ecclesiastes 12, verse 10 says, "The congregator sought to find delightful words and to record accurate words of truth." In harmony with this principle, the Office of Public Information, OPI, at World Headquarters has over the years been assigned by the governing body to convey accurate information to the news media and academics.
Mr. Gillies, sorry, can I just repeat that? Can you see and hear me all right?
Yes.
I understand you wish to swear on the Bible this afternoon, is that correct?
Right.
Could you hold the book in your right hand, please, and then repeat after me? I swear by Almighty God.
By Almighty God.
That the evidence I shall give.
That the evidence I shall give.
Shall be the truth.
Shall be the truth.
The whole truth.
The whole truth.
And nothing but the truth.
And nothing but the truth.
Thank you very much. Counsel.
Thank you very much, Mr. Gillies, and I appreciate and thank you again for your patience as you've been called slightly later than we had anticipated this afternoon. I thank you very much for that.
There are scriptural precedents for contacting government officials. Jehovah positioned his servants before rulers in order to protect his people or to further his purposes.
We've got lots of examples of your policies and practices. We'll talk a bit later about some of the individual policies you have in respect of child protection, but generally elders are meant to follow those practices and stick to them with quite strict adherence. Is that right? So things which are issued should be followed. They're not, you know, you can do this if you want, you don't have to.
Well, that's when it comes to organizational procedures.
So what we start with, the basis, is a theocratic direction from the governing body committees. So basically, if we're recording something of what we're doing as an organization in some format, and it's going to show this is information that we're handling as a branch, then that's a record. If you classify it as an archive, you cannot take it out. So 20 years from now, you can't go through an area, then you say, let's look through all our archived records and clean them up. It's not allowed. And the reason for that is because it's all tied back to our legal defense system. And sometimes folks get the idea that our goal is to just go through and delete everything. The records management guys they got a big delete key on their keyboard and they want to delete everything. Well, that's really not what we have. So we don't destroy everything. What we do is we hang on to the records we need to in order to accomplish what we need to as an organization. What our oversight has determined is how we're going to handle records, which ones we need to keep for providing this type of proof, and which records we want to go away quickly.
We now turn back to the evidence of Mr. Gillies. Good morning, Mr. Gillies. I just remind you that you are on oath. The first question I wanted to ask you is, do you keep records of the safeguarding training that elders, either at a congregational or at a branch level, have undertaken in respect of child protection?
We keep records of the training courses that individuals have been through.
So really they've helped us to understand that we don't have to make the decisions anymore. It's already been predetermined for us and by the organization.
Can I ask, how much do you spend on safeguarding in any particular year, if you're able to identify that? How much?
How much on safeguarding? No, I couldn't answer that question.
Okay. And do you have any idea how much your training budget is, therefore?
Well, the in-house training that we have is, like everything else we do, is all voluntary. So right. Our schools are voluntary, our elders do their work voluntarily, so there isn't a massive budget associated with training them.
It might be useful, if it would be possible, if you do have such a thing as a training budget, maybe if we could ask following this hearing, if you wouldn't mind telling us details of how much you've spent on any child protection aspects of your training budget over the past 3 years. we would be most grateful for that information. And if I can remind you that you're under oath and you shouldn't discuss your evidence with anybody else. Thank you very much. It seems to me in these circumstances, this is a fairly recent case, and I think it raises two issues. Firstly, is the current guidance good enough in terms of making it absolutely clear that in these sorts of situations, there should be reports to the police, so that even if the parents don't wish to report, it is the congregation's duty to do so, to protect children? Do you think that your guidance, don't you think your guidance needs to be strengthened in that respect?
Yes, I absolutely agree, and that's what has happened. If you refer back to the guidelines for the service desks, you have very clearly stated in paragraph 8, which we've been through, that a report will be given to the secular authorities, the police, if there is a child at risk. So,
but the difference is that those guidelines are pretty much the same between 2016 and 2019. And can I also ask, this case potentially also plays into the issue which most people find boring, but I find fascinating, of record keeping, which is, it seems clear that inadequate notes were kept by the elders in this context. Are there any guidelines that you issue as to keeping adequate notes, making sure that if there are disclosures, that those are set down fully and accurately, making sure that you record this information? Is there anything you can point me to that makes it clear what the elders' recording responsibilities are in that respect?
Yes, that's a good question with record keeping. So when elders make a report to the police, they make a record of who reported, when they reported. When there is a case that's ongoing, elders will keep their own personal notes as a memory aid.
We get rid of all drafts. We no longer keep drafts. So once we've finalized our document, we clean out all drafts. And the reason is because there's many comments that are sometimes made on drafts. Those are the ones that get us in trouble. Because when we comment, we tend to be a little more relaxed and we just type things and, well, we'll leave it at that. We just get rid of them.
And when the case is completed, they will complete a short summary of what's taken place, and that will be kept in the congregation confidential file.
So when I work on perhaps a judicial case, when I'm all finished with it, I send it in, I destroy anything I have, because mine are now convenience copies. They have the master. They keep the master. If now a situation comes back up with, this individual, then I contact the Bethel, well, they've contacted me and said, we want you to be back on this judicial case. I ask them for the file and they give it back to me, or they give me a copy. I work on it. I turn in my report. I destroy everything I have. They keep the master.
Jesus foretold, "You will be hated by all the nations on account of my name." So we recognize that no amount of effort to educate government officials is going to change that.
Can I also ask, the argument that was run was that there was no duty to disclose this information by the Christian Congregation of Jehovah's Witnesses on the basis that it amounted to spiritual counselling and therefore was an infringement of Article 9. Now, for the reasons that Mrs. Justice Leven sets out at some length in her judgment from paragraph 19 onwards, and I'm not going to take you through it because I know you're not a lawyer and this isn't the time or place to have these debates, but she it suffice it to say, robustly rejects that argument, identifying that either it doesn't meet the criteria of spiritual counselling, or even if it does, any duty of confidentiality is plainly overridden in the case of child protection. In the light of her judgment, have you considered or thought about amending your advice to elders or to ministerial servants to automatically provide information and not require court orders in the circumstances of these sorts of cases?
Well, first of all, ministerial servants wouldn't be involved in the process. It would only be elders. And when it comes to confidential information, as you rightly say, I'm not an elder, but I do understand that there are the law respects the right of confidentiality in settings where religions hear a confession. So the dilemma that our elders have is that if they receive a confession, what do they do with that? When there's a child at risk, yes, they make a report to the authorities. When there is a criminal investigation opened and there is a request for confidential files or notes or what the elders know themselves, they will ask for that in writing. They're happy to cooperate with the police.
So we've talked about what a record is. The question is, why has this come up? Why is it that we have records management now? We've been functioning as an organization for years. Well, we know that the scene of this world is changing, and we know Satan's coming after us, and he's going to go for us legally. We can see by the way things are shaping up. So the organization has said, we've run into difficulties in the past because of the records we have. So the coordinators committee said, we want a systematic way to handle records at all branches.
But when it's a balance of confidential information, and again, I'm not a lawyer, this is just the way I understand it, it goes to a judge. So a production order is made. We like it when a judge evaluates what is in the file. So in other words, if a judge says, okay, I think that particular document you have there is relevant to the police investigation, then that is provided to the police. But there's other documents which may not be relevant.
And the branch committee is going to give us some direction coming up soon. They'll let you brothers know. But a minimum, once a year, we review records and we do destruction. Now, they may decide to do it more often. You can do it up to as much as once a month. But whatever direction they give us, that's fine. We'll apply that as time comes.
And it's very good when a judge makes an evaluation. We've seen cases where judges have said, okay, well, I won't make a disclosure order here, or yes, in this case, I will do so. And we feel that that respects confidentiality in the congregation, which is an important thing when someone opens up to elders and expects that what they are saying to elders is confidential.
I suppose I can completely understand in the context of a criminal investigation, you saying there needs to be a production order, or we prefer it if there's a production order, it seems to me. But if there's a situation where somebody confesses, I mean, absent the seal of the confessional, which both myself and the chair and panel are more than familiar with, having had days of evidence about the role of the seal of the confessional, your particular form of confession wouldn't meet that absolute obligation. So as you say, it's a question of balancing rights. In those circumstances, wouldn't it be better for you to say, if a confession is made, just as a psychiatrist would say the same, myself as a lawyer would have those sorts of obligations, ministers of religion, you would say, if you tell me that you have committed a serious criminal offence, I will be under an obligation to report that, even if it is said in a confidential manner. Would that not be a more appropriate stance than saying we will respect the confidentiality?
Well, I believe that is what we do, because we will override confidentiality when we believe that a child is at risk. So that is our policy.
And the guide is they need an order of the court. We're not going to do it without an order of the court.
No. When there's a child at risk, they make a report to the police and they provide whatever information they have at that point.
Okay, so, but obviously in that case it didn't happen.
There's a process that needs to go through in order to divulge confidential matters. Now, we've mentioned that if a child is at risk, then that confidentiality is overruled. But if it's a case of an adult victim, there's no child currently at risk, then the process is gone through, as we've explained.
And in the interest of transparency, do you think that your body and all religious bodies and other voluntary organisations should be required to publish annually data on the number of allegations, the status of those allegations, and the outcome of those allegations, and possibly, if compensation has been paid, the amount of money that's been paid out?
Well, that's a big question. I'd have to sit down. I think we'd have to sit down and think about the answer to that question. In principle, we act on the law of love. We act according to justice. So if there's been some injustice, then naturally we would want to make sure that a person is dealt with in a fair way.
I don't know if you recall it when I first started, I mentioned that a record can be a film or a video, but I also mentioned handwritten notes. Now, sometimes we think, well, handwritten note, how important can that be? Well, we found out they're very important. Just a few years, not a few years, well, it's quite a few years ago now. We used to deal with a company. We bought a particular product from them. We hadn't dealt with them in 20 years. Well, that company got into litigation. So that company, in their records, said they dealt with Watchtower. Now, this was in the United States, so right away they come to Watchtower, which is Bethel. That's how they know us in New York City. So they come here and ask us, do we have anything in our records? Now, if we do, then we're connected to their litigation. That's how it works. But if we don't, then the legal world says, well, we have in no way can prove that you were ever dealing with them. They just say that. We used to deal with a company. We bought a particular product from them.
We act according to justice. So if there's been some injustice, then naturally we would want to make sure that a person is dealt with in a fair way.
So they came to Bethel and they checked all the records and they couldn't find anything, but it was determined it would be appropriate to meet with some of those that were there at the time. They asked a few different ones. No, nobody had any records of it. They asked one brother and he said, oh, yes, I do. And he was in his top drawer, he pulled out and he had a handwritten note. So that handwritten note tied us back to litigation and cost us a few $100,000. So are handwritten notes just as important? Yes, they are. So we want to be very careful and cautious how we handle our records, even if we think they're insignificant. The difficulty is it's happened more than once. So that's why we have this systematic program that we're putting into play.
So you would have to think about it, but you wouldn't necessarily object to it on principle.
On principle, no.
If there would need to be any auditing by an external body, would you object to it in principle?
Well, again, we'd have to ask the question, what do you have in mind when you talk about auditing?
Well, I think it would be somebody looking over practices and policies, making sure that A, they were adequate to protect young people, B, that they required minimum levels of training, and C, that the policies actually were put in practice, were used in practice by maybe examining cases to see what people had done or hadn't done in various instances.
Well, what we're talking about today is a worldwide policy of Jehovah's Witnesses, so we would have to look at the policy in that context. But in principle, for all the questions you're asking, you see, we are motivated by what we call the law of the Christ.
So we don't want you to start hiding things away, squirreling it away somewhere. Besides, we can find it. We have ways and means. We won't tell you, so then you won't know how we're going to do it. But it's basically, we want you to follow the program. And the governing body says, we want you to follow the program.
Can I just clarify with you, slightly earlier when answering a question, you said you are not an elder. Of course, you are an elder. I think what you meant to say was you are not a lawyer. We've been asked to clarify this. So that's my final question to you.
Okay, I'm glad you clarified that point. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Now, if you wait there, the chair and panel may have some questions for you.
Thank you, Ms. Scolding. I have no questions, but I will check with my colleagues whether they do. Ms. Sharpling.
Yes, just the one, if I may, Chair. Thank you, Mr. Gillies. Can I ask you whether your policies that you've described over the last 2 days contain anything about the provision of an apology where there's been institutional fault?
Our policies don't contain that, no.
And is something such as an apology ever given on a case-by-case basis? So you've talked a lot about dealing with things on a case-by-case basis. Is apology ever provided in those circumstances?
We would be very happy to look at the facts and see if an apology is necessary or called for.
Thank you.
Mr. Frank.
Yes, please. First of all, is it right that you were appointed to your current post in 2018?
Yes.
And the post is Director of the Office of Public Information of the World Headquarters of Jehovah's Witnesses.
Yes.
And that's based in New York, I think.
Yes.
Before you, who was your predecessor in that post?
Mr. David Simonian.
Do you also have a post of the records manager overseer based in your office or elsewhere?
That's not my position, no.
Do you know of someone who holds that position?
Are you talking about the World Headquarters?
Whether it's the World Headquarters or anyone else, do you know of anyone who occupies the post of records manager overseer?
Well, we have records management guidelines, and each department will oversee its records management.
Do you know a person called Sean Bartlett as a records management overseer?
Yes, I do.
Did he come to give a seminar to elders in England in 2017?
Yes, he did.
Did you attend that?
I think I did. I can't recall it specifically.
You might recall it if you remember the content of the seminar. Can you remember what the purpose of the seminar was?
We want to protect ourselves. Well, the branch committee understands that if it has been destroyed because of records management, they expect you not to have it. So if they ask for it and you have it, now you're in trouble. But if you are asked for it and you're not supposed to have it, then and you don't have it, good.
To help us to make sure that our record keeping was up to date with legislation and that we weren't keeping unnecessary documents.
Not keeping unnecessary documents. Do you mean that he advised you to get rid of some documents?
Well, of course, at that time and even now we have data protection matters, so we have to make sure that documents adhere to data protection issues. So yes, he would have advised along those lines.
My next question is, do you have a data retention policy that you have published?
We have a data retention policy. Have we published it? I don't know.
In any event, you were at the seminar in 2017 where Sean Bartlett, among other things, advised you how to keep and how to get rid of documents.
Yes.
Did he, in the course of that seminar, tell you that the reason for getting rid of documents was because Satan was coming after you? Satan in the form of the legal process.
Okay.
So we've talked about what a record is. The question is, why has this come up? Why is it that we have records management now? We've been functioning as an organization for years. Well, we know that the scene of this world is changing, and we know Satan's coming after us, and he's going to go for us legally.
But as Satan intensifies his slanderous attacks on Jehovah's people and opposers feed authorities with twisted and distorted statements about us, OPI's assignment now includes conveying accurate words of truth to government officials.
His comments, as I say, were directed with regard to data protection issues, as I recall. I don't remember exactly what he said on the subject. No, I don't remember any comments about Satan particularly.
Do you know whether there is a record anywhere of that seminar, of what was said?
I'd have to find out for you.
Do that and please let us know.
Mr. Gillies, I just remind you, you're under oath.